Hello, I'm Adrian, and welcome to part 2 of my extensive Godzilla review and analysis. If this is your first video, I encourage you to check out part 1, as this review will reference several points brought up on it. Furthermore, I do warn you that there are plenty of spoilers in these videos. Without further ado, let us delve into the Heisei Era in Godzilla history, beginning with the practical special effects in this one really went up several notches. The buildings all looked incredibly realistic, and the explosions did as well. However, the whole experience is still brought down a little by subpar sound effects as they continued to reuse the same 2 or 3 explosion sounds. Godzilla himself received a huge upgrade in mechanical head this time around. He can blink, he can snarl, and it looks much more detailed than ever before. The design of the face still looks a bit too chibi for my taste, but it's still an impressive looking Godzilla suit overall, and a return to a more formidable looking Godzilla than the last time we saw him. I was more interested in the story this time around, as Godzilla was presented as more of a mystery, and it definitely reminded me of Shin Godzilla, in the sense that you get to see how they're trying to handle this massive threat within the government. Shin Godzilla even does the same thing that this movie does, of displaying labels introducing every character. I actually very much enjoyed the human parts, and it was very much a plot-driven film with virtually every scene dealing with the impending threat of Godzilla, as opposed to a series of silly subplots before getting to the monster fight, as was frequently the case during the Showa era. It was a nice detail that the Americans spoke English and the Russians spoke Russian. There isn't much destruction in the film, but what there is very well done, and they do come up with an ingenious way to defeat Godzilla. As a small aside, I feel there's a definite subtle nod to the original 54 film. There's a scene where the scientist gives a journalist a large dinosaur school book for absolutely no reason. He doesn't even reference Godzilla, or let him know why he's giving him this large book. He just hands it to him. I feel like this is meant to echo the scene in the original where the paleontologist uses a dinosaur book in an attempt to explain Godzilla. I should note that the Americanized version of the film actually adds Raymond Burr back into the mix, but I did not get a chance to see this version of the film and will not comment on it. So let's move on to... There have been minor shootouts in Godzilla films up to this point, but this film opens with by far the largest shootout in Godzilla history, complete with soldiers popping in and out of cover in an attempt to steal Godzilla cells. They are all ultimately thwarted by another, even more elite agent who is established as a human villain. There are lots of scenes in English in the beginning of the film. It's noteworthy that they were definitely going for a more authentic feel in the sense that if a character should be speaking English, they do. This is a characteristic that pops up throughout the Heisei series. A very interesting fact set in this film while they're studying Godzilla is that they say he is cold-blooded, perhaps most famously referenced in Godzilla 98, where the heat-seeking missiles routinely miss Godzilla and can't track him, as they establish with the line, "He's colder than the buildings around him, sir." Just so you know though, while the terms cold-blooded and warm-blooded are technically correct, this doesn't literally mean that reptiles have blood that is constantly cold. It only means that they are not capable of performing homeostasis, or the ability to regulate their temperature like mammals. Returning to Godzilla, during one of the many destruction scenes, there is a low-angle tracking shot that looks almost identical to the main shot featured in the SNES game Super Godzilla, and I am almost positive it was a main reference shot for the game. The destruction scenes throughout are really well done, and they have built much larger, more detailed, and more populated sets than ever before. Godzilla's design in this film changed to basically his main look during the Heisei era. According to the director of the film in the behind-the-scenes documentary, he was meant to look more fierce and animalistic, and I agree. While 1984's Godzilla looked like a revamped version of the chibi Showa era, this was a definite shift into making Godzilla look more intimidating and threatening than he had looked before. Smaller, beadier eyes, more and larger teeth, longer snout, and much more bulk. The head robot model is also really well done. It has an impressive amount of detail with snarling and blinking that adds a lot of depth and nuance to the close-up shots. The story itself is unfortunately a bit slower paced than 85, and is definitely not as engaging as its predecessor. The film also uses 3D wireframe models for a couple of interesting 3D shots that reminded me of Escape from New York. The final battle between Godzilla and Biollante was shot well, and it was definitely impressive to see a monster as large and complex as Biollante charging at Godzilla, but the battle choreography left a lot to be desired. Godzilla mainly relies on using his atomic breath and actually defeats Biollante in a similar manner to how Godzilla defeats Orga many years later. This film introduces quite the backstory for how Godzilla was created as well as King Ghidorah. It turns out that Godzilla was actually a nuclear radiated version of a dinosaur called Godzillasaurus that survived being shot by the military and mutated once it was hit by nuclear weapons. And yes, this is extremely similar to the origin story that was explored and seen again in Godzilla Minus One with a much more scientifically feasible Godzillasaurus, but we'll explore that later. The film has more mystery and intrigue than its predecessor, as it does present a unique storytelling premise in that this time the aliens are actually time travelers from the future returning to warn humanity that if Godzilla is not defeated, he will eventually grow so powerful as to wipe Japan off the face of the earth. It definitely evokes Showa era vibes in the sense that once again, you have a group of mysterious individuals who present themselves as allies, but can they be trusted? The time travelers then hatch up a plan to travel back in time to capture Godzillasaurus before he mutates and take him to present day so he doesn't cause any trouble. Delving into Ghidorah's origin, in this Heisei timeline, he's created when they drop off 3 cute bat dragon-like creatures when they teleport Godzillasaurus. These creatures then fuse and mutate into the monster King Ghidorah when they're hit by a nuclear bomb. A common time travel paradox that is directly addressed in this film is the fact that one of the protagonists asks why they don't take soldiers who witnessed Godzillasaurus back in time with them. The time travelers respond with saying that they can't send a person who was actually there back in time because that would create a time paradox. 2 versions of the same person would exist, and therefore one would vanish. Interestingly enough, this wouldn't allow for the time traveling scene in Back to the Future, or most of Avengers Endgame, or in any time travel movie where they're able to see their past selves right in front of them. A fun nod to the legendary film director Steven Spielberg is here as well. The American military spots the time traveling ship, and after making light of it, the captain of the ship addresses a soldier who asks if they should report it to command. He tells him to instead keep it to himself, and tell his son about the little green men one day, making sure to address him as none other than Major Spielberg. During said attack on Godzillasaurus, there are lots of blood wounds on the poor guy, just fountains of blood, which I found very disturbing. Furthermore, Godzilla himself doesn't appear in the film until 1 hour in. This film also contains a very peculiar Terminator reference, as the android character is very clearly inspired by the Terminator with its metallic endoskeleton appearing beneath human flesh. Once again, humans help out Godzilla during the battle with Ghidorah as they disable the mind control the time travelers had on Ghidorah. Funnily enough, the tables are turned when they realize now that they have to defeat Godzilla themselves. So the Japanese time traveler, who's the only one who turned out not to be a traitor, turns the defeated Ghidorah into a Mecha King Ghidorah in the future and sends him back to the past to fight and defeat Godzilla. Once again, it was a decent fight in the sense that the cinematography looked good, but the choreography was barely there and they rely a lot more on projectile techniques. It was at this point that I was starting to miss the epic scale of the Showa era battles, even if they didn't look as impressive on a technical standpoint. Much like how there was a Terminator influence in the previous film, here there's a definite Indiana Jones influence as the film begins with a death-defying romp through a mysterious tomb to recover a strange and ancient artifact. Said tomb starts collapsing on itself, of course, and even though our protagonist escapes, he's immediately forced to surrender said relic, just like in Raiders of the Lost Ark. As a side note, I was happy to see the actor who plays the main protagonist from Godzilla 2000, Takehiro Murata, in this film as well. He's a recurring character too. The actor who played Dr. Serizawa in the original is back again as well. The story is focused around a mysterious meteor hurling towards the Earth. The pacing and story once again take a more leisurely stroll and it's not as engaging as King Ghidorah or Godzilla 1985. It's much closer to Biollante's storytelling. Funnily enough, there's even an entire adventure movie inspired sequence of arriving to Infant Island as it's much more of a journey this time around, including crossing a collapsing bridge, rowing, and campfires. This film also brings back a pretty strong in-your-face environmental message like the one seen in Ghidorah. This time men are endangering the planet, so the Earth is punishing humans for doing so. Once Godzilla finally appears, he is easily defeated by Mothra, in larva form no less, in a quick and underwhelming fight as Godzilla is completely inept with dealing with a creature that literally has no limbs. Then he goes up against an evil-like Mothra called Batra and once again gets his tail handed to him. As a matter of fact, the movie should have been called Mothra and Godzilla, or Mothra vs. Batra, as it is very much Mothra's movie. The destruction scenes are way more focused on Mothra, and the whole plot revolves around Mothra trying to stop Batra. Godzilla shows up and basically throws a wrench in Mothra's plans to save the Earth. Mothra's song does return, along with the magical twins, and the destruction scenes feature gigantic and gorgeous sets. Truly amazing work. A pretty cool detail is that they say that Godzilla somehow managed to swim through lava. to get back into action after being caught up in an eruption while fighting Batra underwater, adding even more resilience to Godzilla's near limitless power. What's funny is that Mothra gets the main fight with Batra, and when Godzilla pops in to annihilate Batra, suddenly Mothra helps Batra instead of Godzilla and tries to calm down Batra. Godzilla isn't having any of that and fights them both, but then gets the Tempo-Zan Ferris wheel dropped on him, is temporarily paralyzed, and then unceremoniously dumped into the ocean once again. I mention all of this because it turns out Batra was actually the real good guy all along and was trying to stop the mysterious meteorite from the beginning. So Mothra, with Godzilla defeated, goes off to stop the meteorite herself since Batra was killed due to Godzilla's major bite wounds. While I really enjoyed the incredible construction of the massive sets in this film, along with the great pyrotechnical work and fun cinematography, I was a little let down by how the grand majority of the film focused on Mothra rather than Godzilla, despite it supposedly being a Godzilla film. Not only that, the fight choreography was mostly energy beam blasting, and once again, Godzilla just can't compete with Mothra, be it in her larva or moth form. Pound for pound, up until this point in the series, Mothra is Godzilla's most formidable foe out of the entire kaiju pantheon, as he cannot get a single victory against her. I was also disappointed in said Meteorite Batra plot twist, since with this new piece of information, Godzilla's just a big waste of time in his own film. The whole movie could have happened without him and nothing would have changed story-wise. The thing I probably enjoyed the most out of watching the Heisei movies in order is that each film truly is an actual sequel to the last. There are characters that carry over, plot lines, and the overall story continues too. This time we open on a shot of Mecha King Ghidorah's remains, and that gives the people in the present time the idea to build a mechanical beast of their own to take down Godzilla. Since Heisei enjoys dealing with origin stories, that is once again seen with Rodan and Heisei. It's made explicitly clear that Rodan is a giant pteranodon. One of the main characters even has a fascination with said dinosaur and ends up building a man-sized robot capable of flight that resembles it. The fight between Godzilla and Rodan was probably the most hand-to-hand based so far, and made good use of close-ups and shaky cams to hide the fact that we're dealing with a man in a suit and a flying puppet. Rodan held his own extremely well against Godzilla, and the fact that Godzilla put his hands around Rodan and choked him out to defeat him was pretty brutal. I had no idea that the egg taken near Rodan's nest would actually hatch a baby Godzilla instead of a baby Rodan, so that was a great surprise for me. Not only that, the suit work and animatronics on the creature were actually really well done for the time. Sometimes you can kind of believe they're in the room with a baby version of Godzilla. The pacing of the film really kicks up from the last time as well. Once that fight with Rodan begins, it's a non-stop thrill ride of a Godzilla film. Godzilla's destruction scenes are once again very well done with great pyrotechnics and models. Since this is Mechagodzilla's first appearance in Heisei, he gets a very extended activation sequence showing all the various components and phases to get him out of the base and next to Godzilla. As to be expected, Mecha G trounces Godzilla in their first fight, and Godzilla barely wins, if you could even call it that, because Mechagodzilla basically overheated like a giant toy and ran out of battery power. There's also plenty of English during the piloting sequences, as there is one American pilot, so I'm guessing they were speaking in English for her convenience. Akira Ifukube is once again the composer of the film, and almost all of his incredible melodies are on display, including the Mechagodzilla theme and the classic Rodan theme. In the movie universe, the right song can now re-energize Rodan. The new piece of tech in the film, besides Mechagodzilla, is Garuda. It's a jetpack airplane hybrid machine and helps in the fight against Rodan, who's extremely resilient and puts up a great fight with Mechagodzilla. In the rematch of Mechagodzilla vs. Godzilla, Godzilla is a lot more hands-on with his battle, using a shoulder check, punches, and even throws too, which I very much appreciated. There's also a great POV shot from the cockpit closing in on Godzilla, and a very cool energy beam battle as well. As a matter of fact, it's quite the long end battle sequence, and it was nice to see this version of Godzilla use more hand-to-hand combat overall than just blasting everything. The plan to fire on Godzilla's second brain works, and I thought it was a particularly brutal sequence as you really see Godzilla in pain. Baby Godzilla revives Rodan, who revives Godzilla, who proceeds to have a new power-up, and his dorsal fins glow in a purple and pink shade, very reminiscent of Millennium, Shin, and Godzilla Evolved. After Mechagodzilla is defeated, Baby Godzilla then rides off into the sunset with Godzilla. It's quite a peaceful ending considering the protagonist utterly failed to defeat Godzilla in any way when you think about it. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla II is a strong contender for being one of the best Heisei Godzilla films due to its great battles, good camera work, fast pacing, and fantastic set destruction. The human characters are somewhat forgettable, but it's cool to see that the ESP character, Miki Saigusa, continues to play an increasingly important role in dealing with Godzilla. Here she was invaluable in locating his second brain and was hesitant to do so as well. Telepathy and ESP is a strong recurring theme in the Heisei series, and here it once again returns as after a meteor crashes, the humans are talking about how they will either have to learn how to control Godzilla through telepathy, or Project T, or destroy him with Project M, or Mothra, the new piece of technology created to defeat Godzilla. This is actually a common theme in monster movies, as well as Godzilla movies, with the two lines of thought always being, do we study the creature or kill it? Baby Godzilla has grown since we last saw him, and although he is still adorable, he is known as Little Godzilla now. Furthermore, there's a definite shift in portraying Godzilla as a protector of the Earth this time around. Only 36 minutes into the movie and Spacegodzilla shows up to fight Godzilla. It's pretty quick for a Heisei film, and we're also treated to a Spacegodzilla destruction sequence as he flies around with giant crystals on his back. During their initial matchup, Godzilla tries to defend the little one, but said little one is unfortunately captured in a Spacegodzilla ice prison. This further establishes Godzilla as a caring protector and makes you root for him in the process. After several sequences of metropolitan building destruction in previous Godzilla films, here Godzilla is mostly seen roaming a beach or uninhabited locations for the first fight, reminding me a lot more of the barren wastelands he would fight in during the Showa era. We get plenty of nice shots from a distance where you can see him in his entirety as well. Continuing with the tendency of focusing on monster origins in the Heisei era, which I've enjoyed thus far, Spacegodzilla was formed because G-cells drifted into space after his fights with Biollante and Mothra. Knowing and exploring these origins makes every fight more personal, and having it explained so thoroughly makes each encounter seem more dramatic and have more heft to it. There's a brief shootout in this film as they go in to save the kidnapped Saigusa, and while not as big as a shootout in Biollante, it is a larger set piece and an attempt to have the humans get some action sequences too, something that will eventually turn into its best form in Godzilla Final Wars. Once Godzilla shows up in the city, despite being a protector, he destroys some buildings, and there is a definite shift in showing him destroy not only elaborate sets, but a lot more of an effort is placed in the compositing shots. Many shots use the physical buildings and landscapes of Japan, and one destruction scene in particular combines practical miniature effects with compositing as well. His second fight with Spacegodzilla is quite the treat. Spacegodzilla has several unique attacks we haven't seen before, and Godzilla once again is more hands-on in his fighting. Spacegodzilla also has telekinetic powers, and there are spectacular shots of him floating up into the air while the camera tracks to follow his movement. The robot Mothra, being piloted by the humans, is absolutely critical in this fight, and it can be argued that Godzilla would have lost had it not been for its assistance. Mothra distracts Spacegodzilla several times, inflicts significant damage on him, can even pull a Megazord and split into two forms and reattach when needed, and helps Godzilla in destroying a tower that Spacegodzilla was using to draw more power from. Mothra even crashes itself against Spacegodzilla and was responsible for destroying the two massive shoulder crystals on him. I enjoyed the film quite a bit, and it was nice to see Godzilla back in his protector role after being an antagonist or neutral combatant for so many films. The battle sequences were also long and well thought out, and although there wasn't as much movement as I'd like, every part of the battle was exciting. That's it. We've arrived to the very last film in the Heisei era. And I've got to say that linking it back to the original Godzilla 1954 by way of Dr. Serizawa and the Oxygen Destroyer was an awesome way to end the run. The film opens up with Godzilla glowing fire red with burning eyes as he lays waste to Japan. Gone is a protector figure seen wading into the ocean with a baby Godzilla, and in his place is this monster. It's an extended destruction sequence, and so far it's the first time in the series where Godzilla appears within the first minute of the film, and it's not a flashback sequence. It is then explained that Godzilla has absorbed way too much radiation, causing him to be in danger of literally blowing up, something that would lead to the annihilation of planet Earth, so they obviously need to stop it somehow. In a disturbingly realistic sequence, a poor fish is literally disintegrated in front of our eyes, not unlike how Godzilla was first vanquished back in 1954. And who was the culprit? None other than a growing Destoroyah, or Destroyer, the main villain of the film. Out of all the monster origin stories in Heisei, this one is probably the most unique and hits the hardest, as this villain was created way back when they defeated Godzilla in 1954. It turns out that the Oxygen Destroyer mutated a tiny cellular organism, causing it to slowly evolve into what eventually becomes Destroyer. Once it grows to roughly a bit larger than human-sized, there's a sequence that is oddly reminiscent of James Cameron's Aliens. A crew of elite soldiers are sent in to take out the hostile creatures, complete with large weapons and a tracking device that looks identical to the one featured in Aliens. And not only that, the mini destroyers turn out to have an extending inner jaw just like the aliens. It even snaps in the same manner too. The sequence was definitely going for a more horror movie vibe for a bit, and it was a good change of pace for the film. The soldiers, of course, fail, and Destoroyah overtakes a large part of the city streets. So far, the special effects have all been great for the time. But for some odd reason, they go back to a Showa era technique of trying to make everything in a miniature scale, including miniature Destoroyahs that look amusingly fake. Thankfully, these shots don't last long and they soon form a large flying destroyer. Meanwhile, the Super X3 has been created, and it looks just like the giant ship Thunderbird 2 from the awesome puppet show Thunderbirds. In any case, the ship must now freeze Godzilla, not unlike how he will later be defeated in Shin Godzilla as well as Godzilla Minus One down the line. They succeed in freezing him momentarily. Little Godzilla has grown more and is now known as Godzilla Jr. He's still peaceful, however, and doesn't enjoy destroying buildings like Godzilla, so they hatch up a plan to use Godzilla Jr. as bait to draw Godzilla out and duke it out with Destroyer. But before Godzilla can get there, Destroyer shows up, and I have to say, I've never felt this bad for any version of Godzilla since Godzilla 98. The poor guy is suddenly brutally attacked by Destroyer, and valiantly fights back with his atomic breath, and even saves Miki Saigusa's life in a helicopter, but it's not enough. He's beaten to an inch of his life, and dropped into a building from way up above. It was truly heartbreaking to see such an innocent monster go out the way he did. And in a prophetic moment, the telepath notes that she gets the feeling this is going to be Godzilla's last fight. And she's right. Godzilla tries to take on Destroyer hand to hand, but is quickly overpowered by Destroyer's much larger size. Godzilla's nuclear buildup ends up helping him to temporarily take him down, and watch his little one pretty much die in front of him, in a scene that also reminded me of Godzilla 98. With even more fury, Godzilla takes on Destroyer and blasts at him with powered up beams. Destroyer tries to fly away, but the humans critically help out by taking out Destroyer's wings, leading to the eventual defeat of Destroyer. They freeze Godzilla before he has a full meltdown, and because he passed on his nuclear energy to Godzilla Jr., he revives and becomes a brand new Godzilla, leaving me relieved that the little one did not actually die. The fight was full of great pyrotechnics, big bombastic movements and effects, and probably the most dramatic lighting thus far for a Godzilla film. It was difficult to see Godzilla melt away, especially in such vivid detail, but it was a nice touch that he was able to pass on his nuclear energy to give Godzilla Jr. a second chance. This was supposed to be the end of Japanese Godzilla as we knew it, as declining ticket sales meant that Godzilla was on his way out. But it was a fitting and touching tribute to Godzilla's legacy. The film ends with a short montage of the original, and it was cool that the main villain was also called back to the original. I enjoyed the final fight as well, but I do wish Godzilla would have done something more inventive this time around, instead of just becoming even more powerful to defeat Destroyer. And with that, we have reached the end of the second part of this series. Next time on part 3, we'll be taking a look at the first American Godzilla film along with the Toho Millennium Era. I'd like to thank each one of my Patreon members as their contribution helped in the making of this video. If you'd like to contribute and appear in the credits in the future, my Patreon page is Godzillarex and it's in the description below. Which is your favorite Godzilla movie so far? Let me know in the comments below, subscribe for more videos, and see you next time.